Well, welcome back to Dinner Television. We have been speculating for the last few weeks, what would Budget 2017 contain? Well, it seems to have a lot of spending and plenty of red ink, not just this year, but going forward. And to discuss that, we have our hot topic panel assembled, the Power Rangers of politics. How about that?
Sure, we'll take that. Sure.
Laurie, Danielle, Mariam joining us right now. So I don't know if this was necessarily a budget that contained many great surprises per se, but it's very interesting, certainly given the economic circumstances that we still find ourselves here in the province, that the NDP has basically opened up the checkbook when it comes to health, when it comes to education, amongst other things, saying that we're going to be deep in the red for many years to come. So having taken a look at the budget, the surface numbers here, what's your take on it? How would you rate this budget?
I think they did a pretty good job. I mean, it's as well as could be expected under the circumstances. We've got a massive multi-decade old infrastructure deficit, which we've already lived through the downside of that through Ralph Klein's infrastructure deficit. They can't let it go again. They've got to keep it up. The schools are bursting. The hospitals the roofs are caving in. I mean, they have to do a certain amount of this stuff, and they did it. And I think they looked after people, which is what most individuals really want to see out of a budget. So there's a lot of yakka about there's no taxes going down and didn't help the corporations. Well, it's not about the corporations, it's about the individual Albertans, and I think they came out of it fairly well.
I think one of the things we could count on from the NDP government is that they aren't going to make cuts for that front line. They're not going to be making cuts to teachers or to nurses, and all that is good, but I do think that the numbers are concerning. I think that there's a pretty intense deficit looking at all the way to 2020, which is going to eventually need to be paid back.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have seen anything very different from what we saw today, given the rhetoric that the NDP has been putting out there for the last years, and since the last budget in particular. Their argument has been all along, now is the time to stimulate the economy with more spending, with capital infrastructure spending. We want to put people back to work. There's going to be construction jobs, a new hospital for Edmonton. They're not stupid. They know where their base is. They know that there are some things that have been on people's minds for budgets, like years back, a new hospital in Edmonton, repairs to the Misericordia and the Royal Alex. These are things that they know people have been thinking about, and now people can say, maybe when they're talking around the water cooler, yeah, maybe there's a lot of debt. Oh, but did you hear we're going to get a new hospital, or there's going to be 5 new schools in the city? That kind of thing, I think, is what they're counting on people picking up and talking about and saying, this is going to affect me in my life. Okay,
well then that goes to you two. Do you think that this has the potential to be a political win for the NDP?
Ooh, boy, you'd have to be digging deep in some places in Alberta to make this a win for the ND. But I think they did the right thing. And I think I mean, we've had far greater deficits in the past. We have to do something really dramatic to try and come up with other ways of generating revenue. But really, I think all in all, it's a pretty good budget.
Even with the forecast, though, they're being a little optimistic. They're doing the same things that we saw the last governments do, where they're relying on recovery of oil prices, or they're relying on oil to keep climbing, and that tells me that we're still not diversifying. We're still not looking for a different solution, and so I'm really disappointed to see that from the NDP. That's been something that they have ran on, and something that I haven't seen yet.
So here's a thought, and I know that's not something that was necessarily brought up today, but given the fact that we're looking at a $71 billion debt by 2020 with a $2 billion annual interest payment, that's a lot of money. Do you think that this could conceivably open the door for a discussion on a provincial sales tax?
I would hope so. I mean, what is wrong with us? We have never paid our way in this province, never. We've always been subsidized by the oil and gas sector, sometimes up to 40 cents on the dollar, depending on the year. I just think it's stupid that we're not talking about it. There's ways to soften the blow for people that are lower income. I don't get it. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to be looking at, but.
Jim Prentice got thrown out of office for suggesting that we haven't paid our own way and that we expect the best of everything. And
but
it
the
wasn't
figures
wrong.
support that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, he was right, but I do think that it's political suicide for any party.
Yeah,
to
I was just
suggest that
going to
he
say,
is.
there's no
No.
space in the political sphere right now, unfortunately, for those kinds of conversations to actually happen in a meaningful way, because there's so much hysteria being whipped up on certain sides of the aisle in terms of debt and deficit and tax. There's no space for that kind of reasonable discussion about where the province is going in the future and how it can diversify its income streams, because at some point we're going to have to talk about that.
Yeah.
But there's so much spending on one side of the aisle too that we're not, it's hard to be able to counter with we're being responsible with the resources we have when you're seeing that reliance on oil money still, when you're seeing not willing to compromise in some areas that they probably could.
Yeah, and it's definitely interesting given the fact that in opposition they were so, sold on the notion of weaning ourselves off of that. So,
Well, there's just a lot of hysterical rhetoric, and we get into more and more of that, and it really does make it very difficult to have a reasonable conversation with anything about anybody, because the two sides just pop up and then they get entrenched.
well, there you go. We're gonna put the brakes on there for this part of the conversation, but we are gonna hit pause. We'll come back and we're gonna take a look at another political story on round 2 of the Hot Topic panel that contains probably even more rhetoric. Guaranteed. Stay tuned.